Oh, last year we had
snow elves.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but they got him.
What does that mean?
I liked him too.
Wait, what do you mean they got him?
He used to share his Dunkaroos. Good guy.
If you have put any number of hours into Skyrim, which I bet you have, you've probably heard a lot of NPCs, mainly Stormcloaks, scream about being a Nord and how proud they are of it. They call themselves the true sons and daughters of Skyrim, but there are many theories and many strong points to contradict this claim. After all, while Talos may be a Nord, and that is a big maybe because he's so complicated, check this video out for more context on that guy, he is not a Nordic god. He's an imperial god, raised to godhood while he was Emperor of Cyrodiil, and while he got his start in what would later be Skyrim, since Falkreath was technically in the Colovian estates at the time, and the Nords worship his Nordic aspect, Ysmir, they have had many gods before him. So why are these so-called true Nords worshipping Talos over their original gods? And more than that, is Skyrim even the proper home of the Nords? It has historically been home to a few different races, so what gives there? Well, for that, we need to start by doing some deep diving into Skyrim's past. So far, in fact, that we are delving into a time clouded by mythology to work out if Skyrim is really the land of the Nords and what it takes to be a true Nord. So buckle in, children of Skyrim. This is going to be a bit of a mess.
The spirits of our ancestors are stirring, and men, under suns yet to dawn, will be transformed by what we do here today.
So, many of you have probably seen the phrase, Skyrim belongs to the Falmer or Snow Elves, if you've been in any Skyrim lore video comment sections, including mine. It's not really that original, but this comes from the sensibility that Snow Elves are the natives of Skyrim, having been there since before the Atmorans, the precursors to the Nords. Now, if we're being extra pedantic, which we are on this channel, the Atmorans who later became the Nords might not be the first humans in Skyrim. The Needs were the human inhabitants of Tamriel for much of the Merithic era, and there is a theory that they came from Atmora before the famous batch of Atmorans led by Ysgramor, meaning that the Nords and their ancestors aren't even the first humans to land in Skyrim. Technically, that honour would go to the Imperials and their ancestors, the Needs. Although you Empire fans may have to hold your horses before you start rage baiting Stormcloaks. One is that elves aren't actually native to Tamriel, at least according to their own myths. Elves have, or at least had, a connection to Aetherius, descending from the Elnathae, essentially spirits that helped create the world. These Elnathae landed in Nirn, in the continent of Aldmeris, and according to epic poetry from Altmer far later, these ancients landed in the Somerset Isles of Tamriel, but forgot to go home, I think, because Aldmeris became lost to the ancients. In other records, it was said that the Aldmeri, the ancient elves, fled their homeland in search of a new one, because the continent was facing some sort of unspecified threat. Don't ask me what this unspecified threat was, I've got nothing, but if you have some interesting theories, let me know. Either way, what you need to know is that the Elnathae landed in Aldmeris, became mortal after the convention, essentially a big old meeting where the rules of the world were made, and thus they were made elves, and then embarked on a journey to Tamriel, making them the Tamrielic Mer that we all... Well, I was going to say love, but I'm pretty sure there's not that much love there. Well, not if my comment section's anything to go by. Now this would of course include the Snow Elves. The Snow Elves very much seem to have a strong connection to Aldmeri culture, especially through the way that they worshipped Auriel, so they're technically not native to Skyrim. Now the funny thing for you Nord fans out there is that the Nords, or at least their Atmoran ancestors, might have actually been the first mortals to step foot in Skyrim. Okay, so you might be thinking, how can Atmorans be native to anywhere in Tamriel if they're named after another continent? Well, for one, accurately naming things is not an Atmoran's forte. They called Skyrim Merith, the land of the elves, and as we just proved, is originally not, and is probably a better name for Aldmeris. This name becomes even funnier when the Atmorans themselves believed they originated from Skyrim. You see, Kyne, also known as Kinnereth, her imperial and more modern name, is the mother of humanity, and myth dictates that she created humanity on the throat of the world, with her husband, Shor, who you might also know as Lorcan, his elven name, but this is a video about Nords, so we're going to call him Shor. Now, Kyne is the sky goddess, and thus humanity are the children of the sky, and the Atmorans were the ones who remembered this best, as Kyne still remains one of the most widely worshipped deities in Nordic culture, even if she's been renamed and a little rebranded. This would mean that humanity went north, to Atmora, after being created at the throat of the world, becoming Atmorans, then returned to Skyrim with Ysgramor. They might have even followed the path of the flying snow whales. Yes, there are flying whales, this is Elder Scrolls, weird stuff like this is the norm. And these whales were known to migrate from Skyrim to Atmora, depending on the seasons. You might feel vindicated, as a Nord fan, knowing that an interpretation of the lore means that your people are in fact native to Skyrim, and that the elves are not. Although, bear in mind its mythology on both the elven and human sides. You might also think, this is it then. This is what it means to be a true Nord, to be a child of the sky and a worshipper of Kyne, your creator, and the old gods from the pantheon she led with her husband. It's all about the old ways, and being like the Atmorans. Well, we then have a problem because dragons exist.
You do not even know our tongue, do you? Such arrogance, to dare take for yourself the name of Dova.
I confess, the dragon cult kinda confuses me. Dragons themselves are children of Akatosh, kinda. It's complicated, and I have a full video explaining that, but for the sake of this video, we're just gonna be calling him Akatosh. Now, according to Shalador, the mage who founded the College of Winterhold, and his insights, dragons came into existence when time started. I think. Look, these are Shalador's writings and I can't read this tripe. I'm guessing a little here, but either way we know that dragons are linked to Akatosh because Paarthurnax refers to him as the race's father, and Alduin, the dragon cult's leader, is the firstborn of Akatosh. Even the Khajiit believe the link between Akatosh and the dragons, since their version of him, Akka, not Alkosh, Alkosh is the replacement for later on, went around shagging because one of his parents told him to find love, and no, I'm not joking, and this is where the cat people believe that we got dragons from, I guess. Still, it's accepted by Nords that dragons were around before them, and ruled over Mundus. According to the etchings on High Hrothgar, we know that Alduin had the seat of his draconic empire in Atmora, before bringing the cult to Skyrim. The reason this is a little funky is that we also know there was a massive war in Atmora between the humans, led by Shor and his thanes, Stun, who later became Stendar, and Sun, who we see in front of the Whalebone Bridge in Sovngarde, and the elves, led by Auriel, who is just Akatosh without the scaly persona, and Trinimac, his champion. Now, I couldn't find any records of dragons being a part of this conflict, probably because their initial origins, before Skyrim the game was created, were in Akavir, I believe, although it is quite hard to find stuff that's no longer canon anymore. And we're also not really sure who won this war between Shor and Akatosh. The Nords claim humans did, the elves claim they did, and there's evidence for both sides. For one, Shor and Sun died, so that doesn't really reflect on humanity well, but it's not like elves were found in Atmora anymore, so what happened there? To me, this feels like an Akatosh victory, although one of those victories where you had to lose so much to get the W that it doesn't really feel like a W. Sometime after this, dragons came into the picture, I guess, and it doesn't seem like they started with enslavement. That came later when they got to Tamriel. To rewind a bit, the origins of the dragon cult allegedly came from the worship of animal aspects. The Admorans had a pantheon of animal aspects split into 4 categories: the dead gods, the hearth gods, the testing gods, and the twilight god. Shor was the fox and one of the dead gods, Kine was the hawk and one of the hearth gods, Orkay was the snake and one of the testing gods, while Alduin was predictably the dragon, known for eating the world and thus the twilight god. Curiously, the Atmorans knew that Alduin would eat the world because that's why he's the Twilight God, yet the rise of the dragon cult still happened, probably because he was the only one who could actually turn up on Nirn, given that he wasn't an Daedra like the majority of the Pantheon. Well, he spawned from one, but Alduin specifically had nothing to do with the creation of the world. He's only here to eat it. Weirdly, there were signs that the dragon cult didn't start too badly. And the one from Atmora was a lot more chill than what we got when it moved to Skyrim. We're not entirely sure why this is, but to me it feels like an attempt to shoehorn the modern dragon lore which has already been set in stone in prior games. Still, Alduin is credited with the establishment of the culture around the dragon cult, and that there was an Atmoran civil war going on, which led to Ysgramor and his crew leaving in the first place to find a new home. Because the dragon cult was operating in Atmora at the time, it's safe to assume that this was a dragon versus dragon civil war, which could have led to the winning side cracking down on humanity. This then led to humanity's rebellion, Kine giving them the power of the Thu'um, asking Paarthurnax to teach them the voice, Alduin getting booted through time, and so on. Because this was encouraged by Kine, I think it's safe to say that the true Nords are the ones who fought against Alduin, not the ones who partnered with the dragons for more power, becoming dragon priests. But it also means that worshipping the oldest form of the Nordic pantheon doesn't make you a true Nord either. Its worship led to its mutation into the dragon cult, something the cult itself acknowledges with the animal symbols throughout the many ancient Nordic ruins. This could be partially why the ancient Nordic pantheon evolved into the regular Nordic pantheon without the furry personas, and means that being a true Nord involves learning from mistakes and evolving, including changing the way in which the gods are worshipped. Cool, that makes sense to me, but the Nords are a warrior people, so what should a true Nord think about war?
We were made to dominate. The will to power is in our blood. You feel it in yourself, do you not?
The Nords are pretty famous for getting in a scrap. They fought alongside Shor against the forces of Akatosh and the elves, nearly eradicated the snow elves for vengeance, did the same thing to the frost giants, for a laugh I guess, fought against the dragons for their freedom, somehow won a war against the Dwemer, then started another battle with the Dwemer and the Chimer in an attempt to reclaim Shor's heart. Contrary to her imperial iteration, it should be noted that Kine is a warrior, but it is interesting that the Way of the Voice, an almost pacifist form of the Thu'um, was created to appease Kine after her disappointment over the Nords being tricked by the Supreme Troller, Dagoth during the Battle of the Red Mountain, where they tried to reclaim Shor's heart and failed. Now you could interpret this as Kine essentially asking the Nords, her people, to stop being so violent and attacking everything in sight. Although what I will say is that the intentions of this war from the Nords were kinda just, or at least understandable. This wasn't an attempted conquest gone wrong, which ended Ysgramor's line when a certain High King realised that those wood elves really don't mess around. And then this plunged Skyrim into a civil war. Note that this happens a lot. No, this was an attempt to bring Shor back in full, but it went wrong because they trusted Dagoth and thus I interpret this as Kine asking the Nords to use their noggin a bit more. Now, if we take Ysgramor as a shining example of what a Nord should be, given that he's been treated as such for generations upon generations, and is the founder of Skyrim as we know it, you'll find a few interesting things about his backstory. While we aren't entirely sure what he was, with the dragon cult links causing a lot of confusion, he's clearly a great warrior, having led a war against the snow elves and frost giants and won both unanimously. But he's more than that. Ysgramor was a smart, scholarly man. He invented symbols so that the Atmoran language could actually be written down, and then chronicled his own life and events, becoming the first human historian, which I think is quite ironic. Modern Nords, by the time of Skyrim, have a reputation for being unga bunga and pretty dense, but the dude that started it all for them was basically the smartest guy around. He combined intelligence with battle prowess, and this led him to being a near unstoppable force. What's also interesting is Ysgramor's relationship with magic. Modern Nords are famously averse to magic in Skyrim, most evident in their mistrust of the College of Winterhold, but this was not the case with Ysgramor. He had his own personal clever man, essentially a mage with a funny title using very specific Nordic arts, and he famously conjured a Storm Atronach bear for Ysgramor to ride, which is awesome by the way. Why do we only get horses in Skyrim? Someone get me a goddamn Storm Atronach bear. Someone at the College of Winter would teach that to me. Combine this with Ysgramor's skill with the Thu'um, and that his myths include lessons with Shor in his fox form, and it's clear that ancient Nords valued versatility, strength, wisdom, magic, and knowledge, not ignorance, and this is something modern Nords don't tend to share. This then brings up another interesting point about Ysgramor's myths.
Saint your thirst for knowledge in the endless stacks of my library.
One of the major antagonists of Ysgramor's writings, other than the Snow Elves of course, is Hermaeus Mora, who was then known as Herma Mora or the Woodland Man. As a man who valued knowledge, there was a certain allure in someone like Paul the Octopus over here, handing out knowledge. Strangely, Squid Game acts as more of a Loki-like trickster, taking the form of a hare of all things, and almost tricking Ysgramor into having large pointed ears like a hare to be better at hunting, which would have made him an elf, apparently. Ysgrim buddy, this feels kinda racist, but before it can continue, Shor comes out of nowhere and RKO's Mora back to oblivion. Now obviously this is a cautionary tale about not being like the elves, the enemy. Now while you might be tempted to add elf hating on our list of true Nord traits, put a pin in that for now because we'll cover it later, but I would also want to focus on the message of not trusting a nefarious outside power, particularly a Daedric one. Bear in mind that Daedric princes are gods who didn't help make the world, something that Shor tried to get everyone involved in, and thus while they aren't always humanity's enemy, they are also not to be trusted most of the time, so you can also add not being a Daedra worshipper onto the list of true Nord traits. One way of looking at it is saying that gifts from Kain are good, while gifts elsewhere, like Alduin's Dragon Priest power-ups and Hermaeus Mora's trolling, should be avoided. I also want to point out that the Calamari King doesn't have a particular loyalty to elves or anything like that. He's a free agent, meaning he was just trolling Ysgramor at this point purely for the love of the game. Where's this Hermaeus Mora? I would have loved him in Dragonborn if it was this funny, giving Ysgramor of all people big hair ears just to make him look like an elf. Instead, he's just talking at a snail's pace and getting his filthy tentacles everywhere like it's a Mediterranean fish market. Either way, we've established for you true Nord wannabes that no Daedra worship and no trusting hares are in order, which includes that creepy bugger from Alice in Wonderland. But what about other gods? And more specifically, what about Talos?
まだだ。すぐ控訴してくる。
We've established thus far that Shor and Kain are the main duo that true Nords should probably worship. Kyne has been keeping an eye on Nords and putting them on the straight and narrow pretty much since she's been worshipped as Kyne specifically, while Nords, to this day, want to go back to Shor's realm of Sovngarde. That's the end goal after all, and the nice bonus will be getting into the Hall of Valor. And how do the likes of Talos fit into this? Can the Stormcloaks really call themselves true Nords if they're fighting in Talos' name? Well, yes? Kinda. It's complicated. So Talos once had the title of Ysmir, meaning he passed the trials set by the Greybeards, who follow Kyne's lessons, and theoretically has Kyne's blessing. I mean, I don't know if she would approve of some of the crazy stuff Talos does after this, but at the time, sure. We can work with this, and also bear in mind that Ysmir is Talos' Nordic iteration, so if you are a true Nord, this is the version of Talos you probably should worship. And while this point is theoretical, another thing to bear in mind is that Talos could be made up of 3 people, which I cover in the aforementioned Talos video, including an ancient Nordic hero called Ysmir Wolfhearth and a Shezarene, a mortal reincarnation of Shor, called Zurin Arctus, or Anand the Fox, his Breton name. As you remember before, Shor is a fox and the fox is Zurin's title, so you see the link here, and there are also theories that Talos mantled Shor when he ascended into becoming a divine, sort of taking the dead god's place. Thus, worshipping Talos should be alright, provided that Shor's sacrifices and martyrdom aren't forgotten. A true Nord's destination is Sovngarde after all, and you do meet Sun there, one of the gods who made that sacrifice fighting for humanity. I think Shor is also meant to be there, his throne is in the Hall of Valor after all, but Bethesda forgot to add him, I guess. Still, my main problem with the modern Nord, and you can attribute this to Stormcloaks too, is that they don't really mention Shor enough, and tend to worship the imperialised version of Kyne, Kynareth, who, while largely the same, is still different. She's not as much of a warrior for one, and this is something pointed out by the old dude who gives you Kyne's sacred trials, Froki Whetted Blade. This has also spawned a fun theory that the true Nords of Skyrim aren't the civilised folk inhabiting the towns and cities. No, they're actually the bandits, due to them shouting things like "Skyrim belongs to the Nords," suggesting that these bandits could have been pushed out and are resisting the imperialisation of their country, which, while fun, doesn't really hold a lot of weight for me. Plenty of other Nord NPCs will say the same thing, and they aren't criminals, and it's not like Shor and Kyne worshippers are being prosecuted. Talos worshippers, sure, but Kyne's Grove is still called Kyne's Grove after all, and there are bandits of all races. Still, it is interesting to see that many people agree with me about how the true Nordic culture has been lost a little and imperialised. And it doesn't feel like Stormcloaks, who market themselves as true Nords, are fighting to bring this back. The Temple of Kynareth doesn't get renamed to the Temple of Kyne if the Stormcloaks take Whiterun, and Ulfric himself no longer follows the Way of the Voice, which you can argue is against Kyne's intended path for the Nords. Then again, the Nords have learned through the Dragon Cult that religion has to evolve, or it can mutate, and maybe this is another evolution. Akatosh, the head of the Nine Divines, is no longer the enemy of humanity like he used to be in his early Auriel days, and is actively trying to fix the Alduin problem with us, the last Dragonborn. That said, I don't necessarily agree with the direction Ulfric and his Stormcloaks are going with their true Nord narrative, even with this in mind.
The same words were used to greet the young Talos when he came to High Hrothgar before he became the Emperor Tiber Septim.
A major problem with identifying what it means to be a true Nord is trying to figure out what traditions to keep and leave, and how far back you're looking. Being a true Nord, in my mind, is all about going through the old culture and trying to find the best that it has to offer. I'm not convinced this is necessarily the Stormcloaks. They do get some stuff right, like the idea of strength, fighting for what you love, going to Sovngarde and worshipping someone that is worthy of your worship, Ysmir Talos. But they also seem to leave behind the scholarly elements of the Atmorans, especially the magic. It's not like Ulfric is calling his court mage a clever mage, nor does he particularly care about him being arrested for a crime he did not commit. The reason I bring up this clever man stuff is that Shaw apparently used clever magic to make Sovngarde, so you'd think these Sovngarde lovers would want a slice of that. Another point is that Ulfric has blatantly disregarded the Way of the Voice, left the Greybeards and used the Thu'um during the Markarth incident, during the duel against Torygg, and during the Battle of Solitude if you side with him. Now you could argue that Ulfric's use of the voice is in line with the ancient Nords of the Merithic era and early First era, since they used it for war, but the Nords also learned a lesson here from Kain, and that's how the Way of the Voice came about. Ulfric is abusing a power given by Kain that isn't meant to be used the way that he's using it anymore, unless it's by the Dragonborn of course, and this could be why Ulfric doesn't make any moves to bring back the worship of Kain in a big way, and continues on with the imperialised Kinnereth who's sort of been pushed to the periphery. Now I know that the Greybeards call her Kinnereth whenever they talk to you, but if you ask them to translate their big old dragon speech to you, they will say,
Long has the storm crown languished, with no worthy brow to sit upon. By our breath we bestow it now to you, in the name of Kain, in the name of Shor, and in the name of Atmora of old. You are Ysmir now, the dragon of the north. Hearken to it.
Given how old the Greybeard organisation is, founded after the Battle of the Red Mountain relatively early in the First Era, and how isolationist they are, they probably should be calling Kinnereth Kain, and that's also because they are a pillar of Nordic tradition, but that's a discussion for another day. The main point is that Ulfric and many modern Nords don't seem to care for the ancient ways of their people, and while not all of it is worth taking into the modern age, like worshipping dragons and having personas for your gods, I think discounting Shor's sacrifice and clever magic and Kain's lessons is probably not the way you should go. Ulfric and many modern Nords are very much the warrior, but they forget to be the scholar. A true Nord needs both, and one of the best examples of a man who embodies this is Kodlak Whitemane, being a scholarly type with a lot of wisdom combined with a battle prowess. He's not quite got the magics down, and as a companion probably never will, but you can't ask everyone to have the talent to do everything. There's a reason why Ysgramor was considered singular, although even he might not have been perfect. He was a little too keen to slay entire races of people, and Kain did send a giant storm when he returned to Skyrim with the 500 companions on his way for vengeance. It has been said that this was a test of strength, which Ingal, Ysgramor's eldest son, and the crew of the Harak, the ship he captained, apparently failed, hence their being lost. There's a lot of mythical weirdness with this story, however, since Ysgramor apparently got massive and pushed Atmora closer to Skyrim so that the voyage would never take this long again. Yeah, that's probably bollocks, and the whole test of strength thing might be a way of rationalising Kain's storm to be something positive, as to not go away from the whole narrative that Ysgramor is the best of the Nords. She may have also disapproved of how vengeful Ysgramor was. Winning a war is one thing, annihilating an entire culture is another. Still, this is my interpretation, and you could just stick with the official story. And then we get into the complicated topic of a true Nord's relationship with other races.
I was the arch-curate of Ariel, girl. I had the ears of a god.
Now, like pretty much everyone else in Tamriel, Nords have fought basically everyone, including themselves several times, but obviously have specific beef with elves. They are meant to be the people of Shor and Kain after all, and Shor fought his own twin brother, Akatosh, with humanity against the elves. Now, you could interpret this as being a true Nord's duty to fight elves wherever they are, but the relationship has changed over time, and elves aren't the same as they were during their ancient days. Nords once allied themselves with the Orsimer, orcs, who are very technically elves, and also fought alongside Aelid turncoats in aid of Alassea when she was leading a rebellion against the ancient elven overlords of Tamriel. It's not like Shaw doesn't approve of this either, even though he's very nearly the god of mer-hating, since we know of an elf who actually made it into Sovngarde. I know, I couldn't believe it either, but Codlak Whitemane's ghost mentions that he can see all of his predecessors, including those in Sovngarde, implying that all companion harbingers before Turfig, who introduced werewolf blood into the line, are in Sovngarde. This would include the Redguard, Sirok the Lofty, and Henentyr the Outsider, the only elven harbinger. So while you should always be ready to take up arms against the elves whenever they are up to their usual nonsense, I'm looking at you, Thalmor scum, if Shaw is willing to accept some into his realm, it should be cool with a true Nord to be chill with some too, if they aren't being total arseholes. Of course, we've covered a lot here today about what it means to be a true Nord, and it goes without saying that this includes fighting for what you believe in and what you love. Essentially, fighting for the right reasons, because fighting is a big part of the culture. This is something that Nords on either side of the Civil War can say they're doing, and because of everything I've talked about in this video, it shows you how complicated it all is, from sensibilities to religion and allegiances. There's no solid answer for who a true Nord should be, since it's up for interpretation, but my interpretation, boiled down, is simply this. Fight for what you love. Be open and adaptable to avenues of knowledge, whether it's history, magic, specifically the clever kind, and warfare. Learn from the lessons of Kine. Don't fall for the trickery of Daedra or elves, specifically Tentacles McGee and Dagoth. Never forget Shaw's sacrifice, and don't go too far into that furry stuff again, because apparently it leads to being subjugated by dragons. Oh, and not all elves are bad. Some are even worthy of Shaw. It's more than what many modern Nords are even trying for, and this narrower view is what led to the Nords being seen as Oonga Boonga cavemen, or just Imperials with a hint of Viking culture for flavour, given that they now worship identical pantheons, basically. Don't let this fool you. A true Nord is much, much more.
What a day, dude. You look lonely. I can fix that.
Thank you all for watching a long one this week. I appreciate that this is more interpretation than lore and that the lore is all over the place here, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless and perhaps gained a greater appreciation for Nordic culture. There's a lot more to it than Skyrim suggests, although that's maybe the point. Maybe true Nordic culture is being slowly drained away, and imperialised, which is yet another contributing factor to the Civil War. Now, I know I didn't talk about all the gods the old Nords used to worship, and how the old heroes sometimes found themselves fighting Orc, which led to all Nords becoming children. Don't ask. But a lot of these gods are on the fringes compared to Kine and Shaw, and well, this script is over 4,500 words at this point, so, you know, it's a long one for me. Either way, go make John or Jane Skyrim the truest Nords they can be. Do the whole YouTube ritual with liking, subscribing and commenting, and I hope to see you once again for another video.
When darkness